So I've started to record it, so it'd be really good if everybody but Terry could mute themselves. That would be great. And we will start in a few minutes. Okay, you okay to start? If I start, Terry, if I start the introduction?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and many thanks for attending this talk this evening. I'm sure there are temptations outside with barbecues and sipping wine on the terrace, etc. But it's great to see everybody. I'm really pleased that Terry Newholm's agreed to give this talk, because until he started talking about the Grotesques of Buxton, I had no idea that the town had so many of these fascinating and mysterious sculptures, I suppose you could call them. Terry's asked me to say that that this has been a work of collaboration with many people to produce the booklet that he's managed to produce. But although it is a collaboration, and that's great and wonderful, like all good and successful collaborations, they need a very good helmsman. And in Terry, they've got someone who is an excellent leader and a very good writer. So I'm going to shut up and let Terry take over. Thank you very much, Terry.
Okay, hello to you. I guess with these kind of talks, you expect an expert to come along and dispense their expertise and to go away thinking that you've learned a great deal. This one is rather different, because all of us who started on this project to find and write about the grotesques of Buxton were absolute amateurs. We had no knowledge of the things at all. And I think even now that we're on the point of developing and printing the booklet, I don't think any of us would claim much expertise. You'll see why as I go along, because what we hoped for in the beginning, that we could say some clear things about these grotesques, for the most part there's not proof possible. They are they remain enigmatic, and in fact sometimes the more that we look at them, the more that we find there are difficulties in even kind of sorting out their backstory at all. So you'll see that as we go along. But the point was, it was great fun, even to try and even to find them, and likewise to go around and see them and read the bits of stories that we've managed to put together. It is equally entertaining. So I'm going to start off by trying to put Buxton's grotesques into perspective. So where do we rank in the world of grotesques? The first thing is numbers, of course. The more grotesques you have, the higher up the ranking you are. We have something, I would say, between 150 and 200 grotesques, which from the time that we started out is quite pleasing. It's between 150 and 200 because it depends. Do you count grotesques that have completely worn away, but you know they were grotesques because there's a whole line of other ones that are still there? Do you count a dragon on someone's roof that's perhaps not strictly within the world of grotesques? So it does depend what you include, but at least 150 of very interesting grotesques. Oxford has many more than 1,000. And this is the equivalent, this booklet is the equivalent of the one that we're trying to write, John Blackwood. And it's a wonderful collection that they have there. So we're not at the top of the league by any means. But also the age of grotesques matters. And our grotesques are, however much we try to put them outside the Victorian era, find that they are earlier, we seem to get thwarted with that because they do seem to be almost all Victorian. And Victorian grotesques, that was the beginning of mass production of them. And you can imagine that mass-produced ones, if some of ours are less prized than sculpted ones. And here we have, let me just move this out of the way, otherwise I won't be able to read it through. Okay. It's medieval grotesques that are the ones that are most prized, as you will imagine. And this is John Ruskin talking in his book, Stones of Venice. He was going around looking at the grotesques in Venice. And he says of them, the play and freedom given to the sculptor's hand and temper to smite out and in, hither and thither, as he will. Well, he always writes very flowery kind of prose, but it's wonderful because it gives a real idea of the enthusiasm that he has for grotesques that have come from the sculptor's hand. So again, we're not in the top rank of the grotesques from the point of view of age. The other thing to consider when putting us in the ranking is some cities have a live traditional sculpting of grotesques. In other words, they're still being made, they're still being put into place. And these ones are going into a building in York. They look really fine to me, but apparently they are sculpted by novices, those who are learning their trade. But if that's learning their trade, then they're going to do fabulously well when they're complete. We do have new grotesques appearing. However, they are being modern, they are generally mass produced, and you can buy, for instance, the two on the left online for about, I can't remember, I think it was £9.99 each. They're quite small and you can just stick them on. But they are, as you see, they're actually copies of two medieval ones from Oxford. Okay, so the last thing that I want to bring to your attention is the variety of grotesques. And here again, John Ruskin says, and this is of Venice, care is always taken to secure variety enough to keep the eye entertained. And this seems very important, and this is where we really win, because we have a wonderful variety of grotesques. These are by no means all of them. I've just picked out whatever this number of them is. And as you can see, there is a wonderful variety here, not as much as if they were medieval ones, but nevertheless, certainly enough to entertain the eye. So that's our position. We're sort of not at the top of the table, but we certainly have something of very considerable interest. I just wanted to say something then about the difference between grotesques and gargoyles. And this comes from Alex Woodcock, who is a sculptor and a scholar. And he's written this little book, which is, I think probably the best book on gargoyles and grotesques, because it is the only one that really attempts to do that. So grotesques are similar to gargoyles, but gargoyles function as rainwater spouts. As far as we have found, no gargoyles have turned up in Buxton. So all of ours are grotesques. The term grotesque sounds as if they've got to be pretty ugly, and indeed some of them are. But it derives from the Italian word grotesque, and rather than referring to ugliness, it means grotesque, so of the grotto. And I think the BCA's grotesque on the Little Turnstile building certainly looks of the grotto, but not really grotesque, in fact quite pretty. So that tells us what we're talking about. The buildings that I'm showing now all have grotesques on them, but what I'm showing them is if you look at these, you're not reading the grotesques, you're reading the buildings. You're thinking, oh, that's particularly nice. I remember that one being in a painting, but you're not looking at the grotesques on them. And so it's very, very easy to pass a building without noticing that there are grotesques there. Often they are, as I say, of an insignificant size relative to the building. And this one is very near to where I live. And when I walk down to Spring Gardens, I walk down the steps facing it. But it took Debbie and Carol, when they went round to see what they could find, to point it out to me. So I must have looked at this several times a week and simply not noticed them at all. The other thing is that many of the buildings that the grotesques are on are interesting buildings, but they're not of the caliber of the Crescent and the Dome. So they don't get very much written about them. They don't even get written into many of the books that are written on Buxton. And so again, that reduces the chances that the grotesques will be written about. So very little was recorded about the grotesques. We don't know who the sculptors are. We don't know the meanings that they were supposed to deliver. We often don't even know the date that they went in, and I'll show you examples of that. They didn't always go in when the building was built. And if they were mass produced, we don't know what catalogue they may have come from or how much they cost at the time. These are all things that we thought we would easily be able to find out about them, but actually that proves extremely difficult. Okay, so these are the stories that we can tell about them. And this is Park House, which was designed by the ubiquitous Robert Ripon Duke for himself. And it does have grotesques on, and you could just about make out one right up there. But again, you could easily walk past without seeing these. But what we're mostly interested in is the garden entrance to that house. It now is the entrance to a more modern house, but at the time it was the entrance to Park House. It is said, because a lot of these things we have myths about the grotesques, but not necessarily have any idea of whether they're true. But this one is said to be a likeness of Robert Ripon Duke himself. Well, I found a picture online, and I think it is him at about the age that he would have moved into Park House. And so it's up to you whether you think this is a likeness of him. Sure, there's a beard there. The eyes are slightly sloping and tired, maybe. But the hairdo is kind of strange, but it's simply up to us to whether we think this is a likeness of Rip and Duke, or whether he even would have approved of the image that's there. This is Cliff House, and you may have been in there for a coffee and cake or whatever at some time. And it has two, well, one of my favourite grotesques there. But I was flicking through old photographs on the screen, and I must have, well, these were all off Buxton, and I must have gone through at least 200, 250 photographs till I came across anything that would be of any use. And this was it, this junction between Terrace Road and Spring Gardens, said to be 1870. And this sort of illustrates just this point that actually very often you're looking for a needle in a haystack. You know, you've got to go through a huge amount of data or photographs to find anything that might help you in any way. But here it is, here's the building. The giveaway is those sort of protruding triangular bay windows on the first floor. But you can see that the ground floor, well, another floor has been added on top, and that's fairly obvious, but also the ground floor seems to have been changed quite dramatically. So there was a fairly tall central door, and there seemed to be a fairly modest window either side. Well, now the door is very small, and the windows either side are huge. And that's obviously, I guess, no, not obviously, I guess that was when it was turned from a residence to a trading, whatever it was at the time. It's a cafe now. So this is the difficulty with these kind of things, that the building then we know dates from before 1870, but the picture suggests that the grotesques, which are, oh no, sorry, before I say that, there's one little giveaway of the changes that have been made if you actually look at it. At this point, there is the old keystone from the much taller door in the centre. So you actually can see some of the way that it was changed. And I suspect that the smaller door was put in to give more a better structure to the building when these huge windows are put in either side. But the grotesques are here, and as you can see, one of them's fairly worn, the other one's really quite nice, and they're on either side of the big window on the right. And so here is our problem, because they seem to have appeared whenever the changes were made to the building. So they probably don't date back to 1870 unless they were, for instance, either side of the old doorway. But though it's not a very good photograph from our point of view, it's very difficult to see if there was a grotesque one side or the other. So this is typical of the kind of thing that we find it very difficult to date the grotesques. They could have been on the original building, though there's no evidence of that. They were probably put in when the changes were made. So the stories are quite tricky to follow through. One of the ones that we've kind of speculated with, but I think the speculation is fairly good, is grotesques on houses along St John's Road, Park Road, and I recently found other similar ones up Manchester Road. They're on quite grand houses. And it seemed to me that they looked rather like Amazonian, First Nation Amazonians, with their relatively short headdresses. I think this is possible because explorers were at this sort of time going to the Amazon. Photography was possible, and it may be that photographs were brought back of these kind of First Nation people, and that it became fashionable to have those kind of grotesques on your house. I think this is important, not just because if that analysis is correct, it does give some kind of story to these particular grotesques, but also because I think in the Victorian era, the idea of fashionable grotesques might help us to understand more about the grotesques themselves. I haven't been able to develop that further. This just seemed a fairly obvious one. This is Jubilee Cottages. When I originally saw this grotesque, which I don't know whether you've even noticed it yet on the house. When I first saw it, I didn't have a camera or anything with me on notepaper or pad. So I just thought to myself, oh, I'll remember where it is. And did I? No, I didn't. And so it took ages just wandering around trying to find this one again, looking up at all the houses roughly around the area where I thought it was. Anyway, there it was. And I'm glad I found it again because it is rather fine. This is it enlarged. And being Jubilee Cottages, then that would probably date it to 1837. And it's almost strange to see it on such a sort of modest cottage. But with the wonders of computers, we can actually go back in time and see what it would have looked like when it originally went in. So we're going back in time now. So keep your eye on that photo on the left. Okay, so this is what it would have looked like when it went in. Obviously the biggest change is that it has Victorian barge boards. Those come from a cottage just 2 or 3 houses down that still got them. So I thought, what would it look like if I put them back? And here it is. It wonderfully frames the grotesque, which otherwise looks a little bit lonely in its position, but this really frames it and makes it look quite fabulous. The old courthouse. The old courthouse has caused us so many problems. I looked in a book, the 50 buildings of Buxton, or Buxton in 50 buildings, I think it was. And it says that it was built in 1886, I think. And when I was in touch with the Chatsworth Archive, they said, we think you have a wrong date for that. We think it's very much earlier. And then John Kingsland, who was dating the buildings, suggested that it probably was built a little after the Crescent. So if it was built a little after the Crescent, it may be that these are late Georgian grotesques, which would have been wonderful. We had a story about them that they were actually taken off a building a medieval building that was there before the Crescent was built. So when the Crescent was built, this was knocked down, the Grotesques were gathered, and they ended up on the old courthouse. That seems unlikely now because Alex says that they are Victorian. But here we are in this is when it was a car showroom, and I don't know, it looks 1950s or 60s. But I've looked as carefully as I can at this picture, and I can't see any grotesques where they should be. Now, if that's the case, then the grotesques appeared very much later. And so that's a real puzzling thing. Here are not all of them, but most of them. And even the grotesques themselves are a puzzle, because if you look at them, they're mostly human faces, except for these two. And these two look like some kind of mythical creature. And these two are sort of rogue-faced, red, unlike the other stones. And certainly Alex says these are not the same sculptor. And these ones that are tucked under one of the doorways, and they look very, very simple, and they might be a sculptor's starting piece. So they're not fitting together as a set. And then these three are in Fairfield. They're not actually on the old courthouse, but when you look at them, especially the one at the bottom, it seems to fit perfectly with the old courthouse. The old courthouse has grotesques now, anyway, all around the building, including the back. And it is possible that some of the grotesques were taken off at one point when an extension was put on the back, and they ended up on the extension to a cottage in Fairfield. We haven't yet asked the owners of the cottage whether that might be the case. But the point is, this is a very odd set of grotesques. And at the moment, it doesn't make any sense at all, other than it's a great pleasure to go around and see them. We haven't solved the problems. It is possible, and I'm showing them here, that on Winster Place, the clock tower and the old Midland and County Bank, which is now up for sale. And incidentally, Netta, who's got it up for sale, has covered up the grotesque with her board. So that's, especially as we've got that on our walk, that's a bit of a shame. But the production of grotesques in the Victorian era was moving towards mass production. And it does look as if some of these ones, unlike the ones on the courthouse, might have been mass produced. The way that we could find out something more about these is through the Victoria and Albert Museum, because they just might have one of the old Victorian catalogues that had grotesques in, and therefore we might be able to get a match and say rather more about them. The Victorian Society, who I contacted as well, sorry, I should say the Victoria and Albert Museum did say that they will get back to me, but that was quite a long while ago. So the Victorian Society said, oh, there might be one in a book that we republished a while ago, which was an old Victorian catalogue of builders merchants kind of stuff. Well, I bought it, it's here, and it doesn't have any grotesques in. But it is the kind of thing that I think would be found at the time. And then this one, which is on the High Street, is one of those where it's obviously very much eroded, but you can just see enough of it to know that it was at one time a fine grotesque. There are clearly legs there, a belly, some sort of remains of a face, and possibly a tiny bit of a wing. So we were able to tell a story about the pollution of grotesques, which of course happens in all of the towns that have them. But we can get a sort of idea of what it might have looked like by going to one like this one on Marlborough Road. And you can see wings, face, legs in a very similar sort of position. So these, the four that are on the high street, would have been very fine grotesques, but sadly pollution and possibly their proximity to the very busy high street is part of that problem. Okay, so that's the examples that I wanted to give. So just some possibilities here. It might be that various organisations that I have contacted, like the V&A, the Victorian Society, and the Chatsworth Archive, when it's possible to go back there, might give us more information than we have at the moment. And at the moment also, we haven't gone round to ask the owners of these various houses and buildings because during COVID, it wasn't possible to do that. Maybe we should do next. And then, do we think about preserving our grotesques? Because we have lost quite a few. There are quite a few that are completely worn away or very badly worn. And then deeper speculation, are there sculptors in Buxton who would want to revive the tradition of grotesque making, which I think would be really, really exciting. And if they did, might we wish to record some of Buxton's culture by, for example, commissioning a grotesque of volunteers tending the slopes? We have wonderful volunteers doing all sorts of things, and I'm sure they would make wonderful sculptures. So for some reason, this isn't moving on. Ah, here we are. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. And are there any questions?
That was excellent, excellent, Terry. Thank you very much for that. It's absolutely fascinating. Has anyone got any questions for Terry? You'd like to raise a hand and unmute yourself? Julian, have you got a question? Or I'll kick off with one if I can then, Terry. I mean, you mentioned at the end there that it would be quite interesting to get a modern sculpture to record part of the cultural history of Buxton.
Yeah.
Are the grotesques actually telling a story of a particular building or a particular event, or were they simply, if you like, to sort of they looked interesting or frightening or whatever?
I think certainly in medieval times, stories were being told. But as John Ruskin said when he was looking at the ones in Venice, the stories get so quickly lost. And what we think of them now is purely speculation. Mm. With our ones, I suspect that it was less about stories being told than about fashions that sort of kind of moved through. I can't say a great deal about that because I can only see this sort of Amazonian Indian kind of fashion going through, but it's difficult to discern stories in them. I don't know whether Julian and Debbie wanted to add anything because they've been deeply involved in this.
I just think it's really difficult to find out, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know. A lot of people who live in places with grotesques don't know about them. We don't know about them. And do you remember, I have this fascination with the Courthouse.
Yes.
And the history of the building, and it's been a courthouse, a Masonic hall, a car showroom. And especially when you look at some of the grotesques on now, it's like, I want to believe that some of those grotesques represent cases that went through the courts in Buxton. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
my theory, of course, is that someone then took over the building, like the car showroom, and thought, I don't want those ugly people. And then after the car showroom closed down, someone found all the grotesques in a back room under all this rubble and thought, hey, these are cool. I'll put these back up. And that's the best I can do. You know, there's very little hard information, isn't there? In terms of,
that's right.
You know, when you set off, and, you know, I was hoping and thinking you'd find all these stories.
Yeah.
Stories. And it's quite rare to find them, isn't it? It's quite an
Yes. Yes. I mean, in some ways, it's fun that they are so mysterious. But equally, as you've just proved, you can make up quite fabulous stories about them. Maybe, you know, if we like mythology, then let's have the mythology about it.
No, come on, Terry. All my stories are true.
Rachel, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, I'm just really interested in the process involved in getting to your 150, 200 grotesques, and whether you think there are others still to be discovered in Buxton.
I'm sure there are. Yeah, because I'm sure there are others to be discovered, because there are very big houses with long driveways. And none of us have been bold enough to wander straight down the driveway with our camera out and start taking pictures. And of course, at the time that we were looking, we couldn't even knock on the door and say, please, may we explore your house for you. But yes, well, the process of finding them was that an article went in the newspaper. And a lot of volunteers came forward saying that it would give meanings to their walks. That, you know, during lockdown, you know, you couldn't think of a nicer thing to do than wander around looking for grotesques. The only slight problem is that quite a lot of them are high up, and a few of those at our age, my age, sorry, were finding it difficult to walk around looking up all the time. Quite dangerous, actually. So no, very much a joint effort, and for quite a few weeks I was getting emails constantly with people saying, I found this or I found that, and then there would be another email that said, damn, Lois found it before me. So all of that was great fun. And of course, as you go around looking, you tend to find, your mind gets used to the sort of places that they will be. So you look under eaves, you look on the ends of the weathering over windows, and so on and so forth. But of course, there is always the one that defies you because it's in a very unusual place and you just miss it. So yes, I'm sure there are more out there. I don't think they'll alter the sum massively. But I think one of the greatest surprises for me was Northwood House, which, if you go up to Corber Woods, in one of the entrances, you pass Northwood House, which used to be part of the university until they, decided they're downsizing. I don't think it ever quite got into use by them, but you wander past, and it's a nice enough, huge house, architecturally nice enough, but not something that you'd stop and stare at. But if you do stop and stare at it, you have to go in and look, because around the doorway, the grotesques are everywhere. I mean, I just rushed back from my camera and sort of out again and started photographing them. So yeah, there will be more there, I'm sure. They will probably be in the houses that are less easy to get at. but having last week found 4 more, just because I happened to go up and get a blood test at the Cavendish, and on the next door house there are 4 grotesques. But quite by chance, I glanced across and thought, they do look like grotesques. And so if I'm still sort of finding them, and they're really nice ones, you know, they're very, very interesting ones. So yeah, I think there are more to find. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. John, did you have a question you wanted to ask Terry? John White? No. Has anyone else got a question they would like to ask Terry?
Okay, John,
John, you need to unmute yourself. John, you need to unmute yourself.
Muted.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. I thought I had, but then I hadn't. Yeah, it's just from a civic association point of view, this research, I think, enriches a number of the areas in which we're interested. The coal mines research, the history of various aspects of the town, and so on. So I'd like to thank you for that, contribution to what we're doing. It's fascinating, and the joy of something new, something interesting, something that I imagine has rather taken over your life. By the sound of it. So it's terrific.
Yeah.
That'd be good work.
Yeah, speak to my wife. She'll tell you it has taken over.
No, thank you. It's tremendous work. We look forward to
thank you. Yes.
reading about it in the forthcoming publication.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Terry,
Yeah, Fran, you got a question? Yeah.
yeah, you mentioned that you were doing tours. Are you actually planning to take people around and show them where they are?
It was a possibility because Netta was interested in making it into a tour.
Right.
I suppose you'd have to negotiate with BCA if she wanted it, but in some ways it was attractive, the idea of doing a tour.
Yeah.
But in other ways, some practicalities come in the way, really, that the bladder capacity of an elderly person is not that good. And the thought of getting halfway round the grotesque tour and then having to abandon them is a bit difficult. But I mean, it will be ideal for a tour for anybody who has, a retired actor or has that kind of bent. Yes, it would make an excellent tour.
Terry, have you told people about the booklet, the walk booklet?
Sorry,
Have you told people about the walk booklet?
Oh, no, I suppose, well, I assumed you might all know, but yeah, we're producing a booklet which has 2 walks that you can either do together or individually. They're both, Julian tells me, because he does the directions for these walks, that they're both 1.5 miles and take about 1.5 hours. And they take you through what we've considered to be the sort of the best of the grotesques that are not too far flung. So they don't take you up to the outer parts of Buxton. You're more or less in the centre with some options. Photographs, stories, a lovely map, which those who've tried it say is essential, is wonderful. And we've actually had one young person try the walk. I think he's about 26. And he went round with his girlfriend a little while ago. He said they spent the entire afternoon going round, plenty of coffee, plenty of giggling, and they absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. So I think our market is surprisingly wide if he's not too unusual a person.
I mean, it's true. There are so many really interesting grotesques. The first attempts at the walk, where we tried to get them all in one go, wasn't I mean, you and I screwed up a bit because Debbie and Carol did it, and 3 hours later hadn't finished. And and so we had to rethink it, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we've divided it into 2 walks, which you can combine actually, because they both start from the visitor centre by the Crescent. A kind of northern walk and southern walk. But each one's about 1.5 miles and each one's about 1.5 hours. So it's working really well. And in a few weeks' time, Terry's booklet will be ready to come to press. So you'll all be able to get hold of it, and you can all become obsessed with grotesques as Terry is.
Excellent.
Cool. It's cool. It's all good.
I have actually been asked by, we had probably about 20 people interested in this, so looking for grotesques or dating buildings or whatever. And I have been asked by one person so far if there is any way of getting over the obsession with grotesques and getting back to normal life. So he was asking for advice on that. So that perhaps we should have a warning on the leaflet.
Brilliant. And it will be available in all good bookshops shortly.
Yeah, we'll be doing a rehab collection soon. You know what I mean?
Joan, you've got a question, I think. Joan, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
It's not so much a question as you're quite right that you'll be obsessed. My younger son's an archaeologist, and wherever he goes, he photographs grotesques and gargoyles. Wherever, he's just got such a huge collection. I didn't know that we had so many here.
I don't think anybody did. No, I mean, I obviously I was aware of some because otherwise I wouldn't have known to sort of continue looking. And then it was Debbie's walks about Buxton that sort of clicked that, oh, we could do this for grotesque as well. But we had no idea at the beginning that it would be anywhere near that number.
I was wondering if some of them, because some of them did look older than others, and I was wondering because people do take things from old buildings, and there have been priories. I know my other son's house has huge windows from priories that have been fallen.
Yes.
And I wondered if some of the grotesques might
have come from elsewhere.
Get the feeling that some of them were older, or do you think they're all foreign?
I got the feeling that I wanted some of them to be older, but Alex, who's the expert, is tending to say that he doesn't think they are. If you look at, I mean, especially if you look at medieval ones, they're a lot more dramatic than most of ours. Sometimes excessively rude.
Yes.
Ours are very Victorian and yeah, proper, very proper. I mean, at first I had the idea, and Debbie will remember this. I wanted to prove that when Enza, the village, was moved by the Dukes of Devonshire, and those obviously were very old buildings, that there were some grotesques that were taken out. And when the courthouse was built, the Duke said, oh, we'll have those in the courthouse. But that looks very unlikely. And the courthouse has really, every step of the way, it's defied us getting anywhere nearer to what these are. I'm not saying that we never will, because I mean, at the moment we can't go to the Chatsworth archive, and they weren't willing, obviously, to spend huge amounts of time scouring through stuff to find them. But John Kingsland, the History Society, does go there from time to time, and I might try and accompany him and see if we can get any nearer to it. Because, as I say, we don't even really, we can't be sure of the date of when the building was built, let alone when the grotesques were added, as it seems like they were added. But Julian might turn out to be right. that they were put in and then they were taken out and then they were put back in. That would be wonderful.
Please stick up for my theory.
I will, yeah. I'd
I
love
really
it to.
like it. I just so want it to be true.
I mean, as you can see, we're having great fun. It is really, it's a wonderful project to be with, yeah.
Excellent. Well, has anyone else got a final question they want to ask? Lizzie, yes. Do you want to unmute yourself first? Yeah.
I swore I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, Terry, if you feel like all areas of Buxton have been pretty well scoured, or if there's anywhere that you feel needs an extra look.
That's an interesting one. I suppose we could look, if we plotted them all on a map, we could then see if there are areas that are blank, but they probably would have to be Victorian building anyway. But it is, yeah, it is possible to suggest. I mean, I've never walked along White Knoll Road looking for them, but on the other hand, I have friends who live in White Knoll Road, and if they hadn't found them for me, I would be furious.
Yes.
But yeah,
found nothing in Burbage. I was just thinking that.
I haven't looked in Burbage.
No, no one's mentioned anything in Burbage, have they?
No, I mean, it is possible, isn't it?
And we found a few in Fairfield, and even at the backs of Fairfield, almost in the countryside.
Yeah,
not in Burbage.
Actually, yeah, maybe once the booklet is complete, it might be a very good idea, Lizzie, to map them, see where the clusters are, and see where possible areas that that could have them would be.
Yeah. Because I think it's a sort of thing that if you've, because I had no idea there were so many. I've seen some of them, and so they're ones that I think, well, if I've seen them, then everybody must have seen them. But actually, that's not always the case, is it? So
absolutely,
I guess if the identified ones were plotted out, and the one that you know about isn't on there, then you kind of know to speak up, don't you?
No, absolutely. I would say if you find one, don't assume that we know about it, because I mean, the last 4 that I found, just a week or so ago, when I put them on a little notice to people who've been looking, Lizzie, Lois, who's been fabulous at finding them, said, "Oh, I saw those a long time ago, but I assumed you'd got them." And of course I hadn't. So no, I would encourage anybody who sees one to sort of flag it up.
Brilliant.
We have got, it's not entirely up to date, but we have got a kind of a list with them on. Yeah. So if anybody wants a copy of that, they're welcome to that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if you ever would like to unmute yourselves, we can give Terry a round of applause for a really, really excellent talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. And I guess all we're looking for now is someone with a good historical knowledge and a good actor with a strong bladder who can go and do the tours. I'm not going to volunteer because I failed on the third part and the first and second. But great. Thanks very much, anyway. Thanks so much indeed. And just to let you know, we are hoping to get Buxton's latest media star, Dr. Catherine Parker-Heath, to give a talk in a couple of weeks' time, and Netta Christie is also going to be talking later on in the year. So I'll look out for the website or the e-newsletter for that information. But many thanks once again, Terry, and many thanks everyone for attending. It was an excellent evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, very good. I should go and look at those. Go and look at some.